Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Marketplace Masters. Today, we're going to go deep into one of the most interesting e-commerce markets to watch right now, namely South Africa. As Amazon starts building traction locally and Takealot, which is the local incumbent, continues to hold a dominant position, enterprise brands are facing some really big strategic and operational decisions. I am joined by my own, let me just bring him up here, Mayon Seidel, founder and CEO of E-commerce Council. So he's based in South Africa and works closely with very large brands. He brings a perspective that goes well beyond the usual conversations about, listing and ads and all that. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about what it really takes for an enterprise brand to succeed across Amazon and Takealot, and why operational discipline is really the difference between growth and missed revenue. Welcome to the show today, Mayon.
Thanks, Paul, and welcome to everyone that's joined us. It's a great honor to be here.
Let me just see, there's some funny thing going on with my camera here. So it looks like it needs a bit of focus. Here we go. There you go. It's starting to. It's getting dark here. It's picking up some of the light. I can see we've got a bunch of people joining us. Actually, we've got a number of live attendees. We've got some shout outs. A couple of people joining us on YouTube and LinkedIn. We got Kara from Cape Town. We got some people from KL as well, Kuala Lumpur. So that's great. And also a good reminder for me, just to before we dive into it, to remind everyone this is a live show. So if you have questions, make sure to pop them in the comment section, either on YouTube or on LinkedIn, and I will do my best to serve them up to Mayon, and hopefully we'll get a great answer. But I've got some questions of my own first. As per usual, we'll get right into the topic, and I thought maybe let's set the scene a little bit. All right. Many people may not be familiar, particularly our international audience, with the current state of the e-commerce market in South Africa. So why don't we start there? How would you describe the current landscape for e-commerce in South Africa, particularly from the perspective of an enterprise brand?
Thanks, Paul. Yes, I think South Africa is it's at an interesting inflection point. If you look at pure play channels, Takealot has been dominant for many years. They've got somewhere around 5 million active users and quite impressive revenue of around $750 million in their last financial year. So it's quite a serious business. But Amazon's entry has fundamentally changed the conversation, I guess. Not because they're already matching Takealot on volume, because they're not, but rather because what's behind them is a $3 trillion giant with global infrastructure, and they have a very deliberate and tested strategy of slowly chipping away at the incumbent. So for enterprise brands, this isn't a wait and see market anymore. The window to build the right foundations on both platforms is right now. And what we're seeing is that brands moving fastest are ones that have treated Amazon's arrival not just as a disruption, but as a call to arms or a forcing function, to get their operational fundamentals right across all channels.
So I was just going to ask, maybe whether you have any numbers to hand, but roughly, what is the split of e-commerce? Like, how much does Takealot still take of the sort of market versus Amazon? Like that rough balance. Do you have can you share any sort of rough figures with us, just to give a sense of magnitude?
Yes. So if you look at if we look at users, as I said, Takealot is somewhere around 5 million active users, and the guesstimate at this point is that Amazon have been here for 2 years now. In fact, actually, this month is 2 years. They're sitting at around 1.5 million users so far. So, in terms of size, I would say Takealot's probably got 3 times the customer base at this point. In terms of revenue, we don't know the revenue numbers for Amazon particularly, but we can ascertain that in terms of Takealot, they were at, I think, $750 million in revenue last year. They are roughly a $3 billion business. So once again, not small, but quite importantly, they're backed by a company called Naspers, who have a significant stake in them, and they're about a $60 billion business. So some very big checkbooks floating around, in the market in South Africa.
Yeah, no, that's helpful to have that sort of order of magnitude in terms of where those places are. I mean, certainly from the Australian perspective here, obviously Amazon entered the market probably around 10 years ago now, or 8 or 9. We had a large incumbent called eBay, and fairly quickly Amazon managed to catch up, actually. So I wouldn't be surprised if you see that change quite significantly in the next couple of years, as I'm sure you wouldn't be either. But that does beg the question, right? So if I'm a large brand, and this conversation is very much focused on the sort of enterprise brand perspective as opposed to sort of the individual kind of seller. Like large brands, I'm looking South Africa today, and I'm seeing, a very large incumbent take a lot, and I'm seeing, the up and coming challenger, I guess, Amazon with, big backing as well. How should I think differently about those two marketplaces, and what role can they currently play for me as a brand?
Yeah. So I think they're not interchangeable, and treating them as the same would probably be a bit of a mistake. Takealot's more mature. Obviously, it's an established channel. They've got a well-developed promotional calendar. They've got a loyal local base, and a buying team structure that tends to reward relationship management. And it's where most enterprise brands have built their pure play presence up until this point. But Amazon South Africa brings their global infrastructure. They bring a vendor model that's got quite specific content and operational standards, and significantly more advertising sophistication. Even if it's not fully active yet in South Africa, some of it is, and the rest will be coming very soon. So the brands winning on both aren't treating them as the same job. They're building channel-specific strategies, and obviously with dedicated budgets. I think the key difference is that Takealot will probably deliver more of the right now kind of revenue, but using right now strategy for Amazon would be a mistake. But on that, I heard something recently that I found quite amusing, that if you were to ask any brand selling on Amazon in the USA, Germany, UK, Australia, or any other market, what would they have done differently if they had it all over again on Amazon? And without fail, the answer would always be, I wish I'd started sooner. Because playing catch up later is an expensive game, and it actually is easily avoidable.
I think that's such a truism. I mean, it's hard to say, it's this hindsight thing, right? But there's a real opportunity to build the asset at a time when, and when I say asset, I'm talking about like your seller reviews, your listings. CPCs are cheap. There may not be the same magnitude of sales, and there aren't, but actually there's an opportunity to really get a foothold and an asset there, whilst it's really affordable. It doesn't require that level of investment that one needs these days to say, to start an Amazon store in the US. Before we move on, can I just clarify, Takealot, do they operate a 3P model, or is there also a 1P part of their business?
There's also a 1P part of their business. They, in that respect, they are quite similar to Amazon, where they have a vendor, a vendor central, let's call it, as well as seller. And I think that the last time I looked, there was something like 30 or 40,000 sellers at least that are using the 3P model.
Thank you.
But I just want to add something there as well, Paul, is that when we talk about these numbers, they're not as significant as we would see in bigger mature markets. But the important thing is that in South Africa, we're only at about 10% penetration of online within the retail sector, and this number is growing quickly. And for a number of reasons, we're always a bit slower than other markets, but also because of access that is being improved. As we speak, access to a larger portion of the population that will easily be able to shop online, where traditionally it has been more of a struggle. So I would see South Africa potentially up there as one of the fastest growing e-commerce markets, purely because the penetration is still at lower levels.
Yeah, and just a minor follow-up question on that, and showing my complete ignorance about Africa as a geography and how it works, is I mean, is it useful, helpful to think about South Africa as a base into other parts of Africa, or is the market just not structured that way?
I think it's always useful. My understanding is that the rollout of a platform like Amazon it's not going to be necessarily regional. I think the next big market that Amazon want to attack to penetrate in Africa is Nigeria, because that is a massive market. It was on the roadmap for them, I think, even before they were going to launch in South Africa. But yeah, I think the bordering countries or the neighboring countries in South Africa, might not have the volume and the size of market. But if you looked at Africa as a whole, it's definitely a growth, it's a growth area. And I think in some ways it's the last serious, exponential growth area that is available. But it's going to be concentrated in key markets, which I'm not sure would be a slow regional rollout, but more specific spots that Amazon would choose.
Yeah, sure. Where the ROI is there more in the medium term. Yeah, I understand that. So going back to South Africa.
Sorry, just to add as well, if we consider AWS, Amazon Web Services, that is initially a South African company. So in terms of that part of the Amazon business, they're also head officed in Cape Town as well. So they have quite a big base here as a group, and that would tend to be the launching pad for the rest of Africa, not only in the marketplace business, but again in AWS and a bunch of other stuff they offer.
So you're part of the service provider ecosystem in South Africa. I mean, I think it's probably very early stages. I haven't met hundreds of marketplace agencies yet in South Africa. I think it's really early stage, and you're probably one of the earliest, if not the earliest, on the ground there, which means that you are having a first look at how brands are doing on these marketplaces without little external support. And when you look at that, what are you seeing on the ground there in terms of the common mistakes or areas where enterprise brands, most commonly, underperform on the marketplaces, whether it be Takealot or Amazon?
Paul, the short answer is almost never where they think they are. Brands often assume that this is a content and an advertising challenge. So they tend to invest in better creative or increase their ad spend, and often sit back and wonder why revenue is flat. But 9 times out of 10, the real issue is actually upstream. Things like stock availability, forecasting misalignment, between the brand team and the marketplace, or simple things like purchase orders sitting unprocessed because nobody owns the PO internally. We had a client that was ranking really well. The ads were performing great, but sales were flat. And the problem actually was a fulfillment disconnect. Inventory just wasn't flowing through correctly. So, when we were able to fix that operational layer without changing anything else, the sell-through improved relatively quickly within 6 to 8 weeks. So, it's until you fix that is broken underneath, the marketing layer is essentially like pushing water uphill.
I mean, a lot of that speaks to, having the fundamentals in place for being able to do D2C shipping and e-commerce. When you're talking to your customers, how do you prepare them? Or because I think the other dynamic here as a play is, I'm not too familiar with what Takealot expects, but certainly when Amazon came into our market, they set the bar way higher than any of the incumbents did, which meant, people really needed to lift in terms of their operational performance and the like. And quite frankly, a lot of brands were reluctant to do so. They were like, well, these other parties have always thought this was okay. I'm just going to do the same. I mean, how are you experiencing those conversations?
Yeah, I think, how we've positioned things is to say that, guys, if we optimize or we set things up that is compliant or follows policies of Amazon's, we're set up for any other platform. So this is the stock standard measurement. This is the North Pole, the Northern Star, not the North Pole, of where, if you get it right for Amazon, you've probably got it right for any other platform. They are the most stringent. And I think what's really interesting, especially using platforms like Merchant Spring and a bunch of others out there, we're able to understand competitively what's going on. from a perspective of, let's say, bestseller ranking, if we have a look at a bunch of SKUs or ASINs across the world, and we have a look at those that are leading, they're set up in a very specific way. With a lot of clients in South Africa, when we tell them we need 6 images and we need videos and we need some really, really great A+ content or enhanced brand content, and by the way, we need to build your brand store as well, and it needs to do this, that, and the other, it feels as if, that's, wow, like, why? And what we're able to do is point to the fact of here's where the success is happening, and it's because, to a large extent, they're set up efficiently and they're set up correctly. So this is an investment that you're making that is actually going to play out well for all the platforms that you're on. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, no, I was going to ask of those different, heavy operational focus, right, in terms of getting the basics right. Do you find, is there a pattern, is there a thread where, as you bring on more clients, help them, rather than talking about, hey, let's run DSP campaigns, let's do sophisticated subscribe and save, you're probably having completely different conversations with these clients, right? You're probably having to explain, what the role of an agency is in the first place, but then beyond that, what are the most common, what are the most common things that you need to sort of work with them to fix, on their operational front? Is it inventory? Is it forecasting? Is it internal stakeholder management? What will be on your top 2 or top 3 challenges that you have to tackle as part of onboarding a client?
Yeah, look, I think for me that the biggest piece is about accountability. And in a large corporate, the e-commerce channel might touch, the brand managers, the category team, the logistics, the finance team, the sales director, and they all have different priorities, and different reporting lines. So what we're finding there is that there's very seldom somebody who's owning the entire thing end to end. And what our role often becomes, it's as much about internal coordination as it is about platform execution. So we're doing the translating between what Amazon needs operationally and what the brand team is able to deliver. So, that's where we exist in bridging the gap. And it consistently is what determines whether the channel grows or stagnates.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The other thing to add is the entire layer of right from the top where executive sponsorship is required. We talk about a single point of accountability on the brand side, but if there's somebody that owns that internally within an organization and isn't just having it as a side responsibility, they also they also tend to come up with realistic expectations. Because marketplace growth, as we know, isn't instant. It requires so much from catalog investment to the operational discipline and an honest horizon on when you're going to start seeing compounding results. So brands that usually lack that internal champion, I think they underestimate the operational lift, and trying to manage it entirely through the existing trade or field sales structures, which just aren't built for it.
Yeah, it just becomes an afterthought, or it becomes the most junior sales rep's responsibility, along with all the other emerging market channels, right? Seen that before. So, it is interesting, and it strikes the question, certainly from an agency point of view, which is, you tend to go in there and you go, actually, guys, we need to get all these fundamentals right? Because otherwise, what's the point? But then you need to balance that with, you're on the pressure to deliver some wins, some quick wins, and that, right? And that must create quite a bit of tension at times. Where do you go to for quick wins in South Africa, particularly on Amazon, but maybe on Takealot as well? When you take on a client, obviously it's a bit like you got to drive the car and change the tires at the same time. But what are some of the wins that you find actually that they give you some good runs on the board early on? It builds that trust with the brands. What's your go-to list?
So I think from a top line perspective, as I said before, if you have somebody that is really just interested in additional revenue this year, this quarter, or this month, I think that And if they're just chasing ROI metrics, Takealot is probably the better place to spend your resources, your time, and your money. But I don't think it can be done in isolation. Yeah, you're gonna get it's going to be a channel that is going to spit more revenue, but I think it's more about trying to look at the long-term picture. So the long-term work is essentially about building the sustainable rank and getting that share of voice, and to get that operational infrastructure in place. So what we encourage clients to do is to think in a 90-day cycle, essentially. What are we fixing this quarter? What are we building for the next? And I think the brands that treat marketplaces purely as a promotional channel, they can tend to plateau. But it's in the short term, I think that if you've got a clean catalog, if your pricing is correct, if you've got at least a few decent images on a listing, if you go the extra length to have proper A+ content on every listing, you have a brand store. And I think when it comes to the vendor relationship, it's about having a really good relationship with a buyer. There is the added value service, Amazon, vendor service that costs money. But I think it's about an ongoing conversation with the actual buying people and those that would have some influence over the buying algorithms, I guess. And then it's about looking at things on a daily and weekly basis and not hoping that we can look at it once a month. There are opportunities that surface on a daily basis, and there are issues and there are crises that can appear on a daily basis that can do the opposite. It can be a quick loss instead of a quick win.
Yeah, no, it's you touched on a really important point there around the relationship with Amazon. In my experience, I've often seen quite a big difference between the approachability and the collaboration with Amazon people in emerging markets or growing markets than in mature markets. And it's certainly, I'm sure the same in South Africa, where Amazon, whether it's on the seller or vendor side, they're really incentivized to grow the catalog, to bring on sellers, and they're very willing to invest incentives and help and all that to make that happen. So take full advantage of that as well.
Yeah, it's actually interesting, relationship if you step back a little bit, where Amazon is the client, actually, and we're trying to sell the product of our clients to Amazon. And it's in a normal course of events, the client is the primary individual that has to be taken care of. But the relationships we've built as an agency with some of the buying teams internally is that they need our help. They have they've got something to fulfill. They've got a KPI to achieve, and that becomes that's a number of sales of different products and the growth of different categories. And without the products that our customer, that our client supplies, they don't hit those numbers. So they're often pushing us really, really hard to make sure that our client can deliver sufficient stock and sufficient inventory.
Yeah, they have their KPIs, of course.
And they look to us to help them with their KPIs.
Of course.
It's fascinating.
I mean, if we can make the Amazon counterparts look good internally, then that's most of the job done, right? Everything else becomes easier.
Exactly.
That's still true anywhere in the world, by the way. I don't think that's specific to South Africa. But what about one of the things we haven't touched on, I think maybe implicitly, but not explicitly, which is considerations for when brands actually enter South Africa. So obviously we're talking about, I guess, assuming local enterprise brands selling on Amazon and Takealot. But are there further considerations or other considerations for brands maybe looking at South Africa as an expansion opportunity, right? They may have great content. They may already have good reviews on ASINs. They may be very familiar with the whole Amazon ecosystem, and now looking at South Africa as, I guess, making an investment for the future. Go back to our earlier point. I mean, what advice would you give to brands that are trying to expand from international into South Africa? And then I also, just before you answer that, hold that thought, I can see a number of questions flowing in. from Lewis in particular. So I'm going to take that one right after you answer this question. So yeah, why don't you head off and then.
So what's interesting is that there's a lot of global brands that already exist in South Africa. You know, there's the companies that have distribution rights and that have agencies, and across the board from all your top brands, from and I think this is obvious, from a Nike to a Coca-Cola. But we're working with a company by the name of Pernod Ricard, which is they're the guys that own Jameson and a bunch of other really well-known alcohol brands. And they, as much as they're looking at their footprint across Amazon internationally, we've had to purpose build something for them in South Africa for various reasons. Alcohol volumes might be different, the sizes of bottles might be different, and some collaborative stuff is different. And we've had to actually purpose build that for this market. But that said, in terms of international brands that are operating incredibly well in the US, UK, Germany, Australia, wherever it might be, it's a simple, not easy, I didn't say easy, but simple operation to actually extend into the South African market. The question then becomes about having a 3PL in South Africa that could assist, or if your volumes are substantial enough, shipping directly into Amazon and or Takealot themselves. But I do think having a local 3PL is definitely the route to go. And I think that what's interesting about that is that often strategically, if you end up being able to penetrate the pure play marketplaces, it becomes a much quicker conversation when you start looking at the brick and mortar businesses in South Africa. We're having great penetration, great success online. You should consider, and there's some really, really large businesses and massive brick and mortar chains that aren't going anywhere right now. There's access across the country, and sometimes more so than in other developed markets where the broad customer base has access to brick and mortar, sometimes even more than they have access to online shopping.
That's a great link. Yeah, great link. Now, let me bring Lewis not Lewis, Javier Lewis. He's got a question. It sounds like he's based in Europe. He's very interested in this question, which is for a European manufacturer brand, making it very practical and real here, obviously looking to expand into South Africa. What's most interesting, Amazon or Takealot?
Very good question. I think we've chatted a little bit about it, just now. But the reality is, it depends on what your strategy is. If you're trying to understand where you could be 3 to 5 years from now within the South African market context, I would definitely, put quite a big focus onto Amazon. I do believe that their success is going to match that success that they've had in almost every other market they've been into. But if you have a much shorter term strategy and you're looking for immediate returns, immediate revenue, you cannot leave out Takealot. They do have 3 times the market, customer base than Amazon does. So it depends on how big your catalog is, and it depends on how sustainable your supply chain is. So if you've got something that has been selling, really, really well in other markets for a couple of years, I would say the first step would be registering on Takealot, getting into that market, and then at the same time having a look at the setup and the infrastructure build on the Amazon side.
That's great. Thanks for your answering the question, Mayon, and thank you for posing the question, Javier. That's great. We are at the 30-minute mark, and I'm always respectful of time, but we have one more question, and then we will wrap up today. And our last question for today is from Gerard. He asks, hello, it's a nice greeting. For enterprise brands entering Amazon South Africa early, what is the most expensive, we'll fix it later, mistake you keep seeing, right? What is the biggest mistake that new entrants or new sellers or vendors on Amazon South Africa tend to make?
I think I could answer that in many ways, and there's many really good answers to that. But I would start with the strategy, and I would start with, very often it's really exciting to get up and selling and seeing your product online and seeing revenue coming in. But one would have to be really strategic in what your specific goals are in the short, medium, and long term, and sort of create that roadmap and stick to it. Obviously, these things change as we go along. But what I've found is that if you don't carefully think about every single step you're making and what impact that has on your cash flow and a whole bunch of other things within your business, you can get to a point you almost be careful what you wish for. You start selling so much you can't supply. So I think what needs to be fixed first and not fixed later is your strategic thinking and your positioning within the market. I think that inventory is my biggest bugbear. There needs to be stock available all the time, but my understanding is also that means you have to have the cash flow. So I think that's another thing, another layer I would say that might not be platform specific, but more business specific, is that make sure that your cash flow, the access to cash flow, is going to match your strategy, and don't try and retrofit that later because it will be a disaster. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, I think it was great. Thank you for your question, Gerard. I mean, working capital, cash flow, and particularly tied to the question of, how much inventory should I send, right? Because invariably, you're either not going to have enough or it doesn't sell and now you're stuck. And, what do you do with it? You're going to put it back on a ship and send it back? Probably not. So that's always requires a lot of thinking, planning, forecasting, and hedging, in terms of products. So absolutely. All right, we are essentially out of time here, Mayon. So we're gonna have to wrap it up. Really great conversation about South Africa. At least I have a much better perspective of what the marketplace looks like, what the landscape looks like, and what to consider sort of entering now and where to get the returns now versus in the medium term. We've had quite a lot of interest actually in this episode. And there may well be people listening now live or people watching this on demand later that say, look, actually, I do have more questions. I want to follow up with you, want to have some further conversations. So what is the best way for our audience to get in touch with you?
So you can send an email directly to me. That would be mayon@ecomcouncil.co.za, which is maon@ecomcounsel. So it's not council, the CIL, it's council, SEL, as in legal counsel. mayon@ecomcouncil.co.za. Let
me just see if I've done it right here.
That is correct.
That is correct. Perfect. Okay, that is the preferred way.
And if we have a conversation, or if you guys want to have a call and set up a call with me, we do obviously have quite a large team, and we can bring in specific experts on specific areas that you would like to discuss in more detail.
Yeah, perfect. No, I appreciate that. All right, fantastic. Well, I'm going to say goodbye to you, Mayon. It was an absolute pleasure. And I look forward to staying in touch and see how South Africa really evolves. I'm sure there are going to be some very exciting years ahead, especially on the Amazon front.
Yeah, and Paul, thank you for Merchant Spring. It really does a lot of the heavy lifting for us in a lot of the work that we're doing. So I appreciate the effort you've put into making that tool as fantastic as it is.
Thank you. Thanks for the kind words. All right, everyone. That brings us to the end of today's episode. These episodes go really, really quickly. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'd love to see you next week. We're going to be talking about vendor direct fulfillment and how to get it right from an operational point of view. So head to our website, merchantspring.io, go to resources, and have a look at all of the upcoming live webinars we've got lined up for you, including the one next week about vendor direct fulfillment. Until then, stay safe, take care, and see you next time.